When I started working for Bappa, the first thing he said to me, if you think that wall is white and I say it's blue, you've got to say it's white. Never say what I say. Always say what you experience. So this picture people have of Bappa is completely false. It's something that they've reproduced, they've projected onto Bappa from their childhood or from so popular images of authoritarian old men. Bappa was absolutely different. Bappa was unlike anybody I've ever met.
So I'm Matthew Clark, and I'm the facilitator. And really I'm here to draw everyone into a conversation on a topic that I would call rivers and mountains. Is Subud a river free-flowing through the world, touching everything in its path? Is it a mountain to be found and discovered and climbed to the pinnacle? The concept is that there is a divergence of views across a spectrum. And I've selected some people, long in Subud, active in the world, who reflect divergence of views along this spectrum. And we're here today to just talk about a few things in the hopes that when we open it up to conversation, it will make people more comfortable rather than less.
When I talk to people who ask me about Latihan, I normally listen to them. I listen to see the way they speak. And if in their expression, looking for spiritual awakening, they are not using words which are religious or which are from one religion or another, I take note of that. So I will not myself use religious words to explain the Latihan. I will go back to something very simple and very basic. So some people said, well, Leonard, this is terrible, because Bappa said you have to read this and read that. And I say, well, Bappa has told us that Latihan is for humanity, for mankind. He has told us, don't listen to Bappa, but follow Bappa. You see Bappa as an example. In other words, follow what you receive and put it into practice. So to me, that is the most important of all. It is the priority as Subud members to put into practice what we receive in the Latihan, but let's be before the word. So let's not repeat the word that we hear as a kind of program. The opening words that Bappa has finally given, because when I started, there was just relax. That was the only word I had. The opening word is given was to give us a sort of an idea that the person who is receiving has to be quiet. Bappa being a Muslim, he used a Muslim language. But it doesn't mean we have to use the same language, because we're not Muslim, and the person in the front of you may be a Christian, maybe somebody like myself. I have no religion. I don't feel less than somebody who has one. I'm free to sometimes do a bit of fasting, so I know how the Muslims are feeling. I'm free. I'm completely free. And I feel that my soul is able to live in this world without all that set vocabulary, which is slowing down the process of expansion of the Latihan in our society. But what is, to me, has to go with that is a feeling of love and care.
I grew up with the word helper. I grew up with the word opened. And actually, those words have no problem for me. I've gotten very comfortable with those words. I've grown up with them. So I don't think about it for me. But I have a 17-year-old daughter. And my daughter is continually changing my language the way that maybe when I was growing up, older people around me would talk about coloreds. And coloreds was an okay word, they thought, but we, of course, don't feel that that's an okay word, so it's very upsetting to me to hear that when I was young. Well, my daughter is very attuned to language today, so my concern is that things that I may not even notice, the generation coming up underneath me has real sensitivities that are different than mine, that were different than my parents, and that if we don't change anything, particularly as you were just talking about the language, if the language of Subud stays exactly the same, which was the language from the 50s, then we're speaking a language that is probably not translating at all to younger people. And if we want to open it up, and this is my question, if we want to open up, isn't it possible that we need to translate the language so that we're more open, more simple, more easily accessible to more people? That's my open question.
You know, I hear there's a lot of discussion about changing Subud, changing the word. They're not interested in that. It's the content that we use when we speak to the young people. If the content is there, they'll feel it. They'll be touched by it. That's it.
I did grow up in Subud, so the words maybe aren't strange for me. But actually, when I read Bapak's talks, I find the language actually very simple. You know, I try to also read books on Hinduism and other spiritual practices, and they are so difficult to understand for me. The language there is actually it's like a mystery. The language is like a mystery. But in Subud, I find the language actually simple.
When you come to a congress like this, you get a feeling of a very big tent or a very marvelous tent where a lot of different people with a lot of different views can be quite happily in this particular tent. We may gripe about language, we may be fed up with authoritarians, we may be criticizing various aspects that happen in this tent. But at the same time, we all receive this extraordinary gift of the Latihan. And each one of us, you can't make all of us the same. There's no way that we should be the same in some way. We are different. We're different at every aspect of our lives, every aspect of our being. We are young and old and simple and complicated. We're not the same. Why should we be the same? Why should we behave the same? So I think the space, and this is why I've always been, you know, I often have tried to run away from Subud, but I've never quite succeeded. I did once, actually. But I do come back to this extraordinary experience. And I don't actually think that it is a question of either rivers or mountains. I think that reduces the possibilities. I think that each one of us is a kind of a mystery as we carry the Latihan with us. And what we do with the Latihan is what might help others come into Subud or not come into Subud. And, you know, I do bring in quite a few, but not as many. I thought I'd be bringing in thousands, you know, but it hasn't happened that way. But a great many people have come in, and a great many people leave, as you said. And they leave, I think, because we haven't got our language right. We're very authoritarian. We have these holy people called helpers, who are just struggling people in Subud, the same as everybody else. And I think we've put helpers on a different level, and that's a terrible mistake. Helpers should be at the same level as the group, and international helpers should be at the same level as the group, and super being helpers should also be at the same level. And so that we don't have this hierarchy. I think it's hierarchy that upsets the young. Thank you.
I don't know about how to use the tent analogy, but I would say it's a closed system. It's not an open system, and I would say that this production right here is a good illustration of that. At this Congress, that such an important topic doesn't have a proper space and isn't broadcast and announced to the members of that have come around the world to attend this Congress, that such an important topic isn't even announced ahead of time so that people don't know about it and can't participate in a discussion. Everybody here who's a long-term member of Subud knows at least one, if not many more, people who have left Subud unsatisfied for whatever reason. Maybe that was their path, maybe that's their own choice, but there are conversations that are discouraged from occurring, and this is one of them. this is sort of an introduction to these conversations. So why is it that we gather together every 4.5 years, and it's discouraged that we should have a proper time to even talk about this? It doesn't make sense to me.
The U.S. Constitution was written 200 years ago, 200 plus years ago. When we wrote the Second Amendment that gave the right to bear arms, we couldn't possibly have known what kind of arms were going to exist at that time. So the world changed over 200 years, and we're still struggling with, do we honor the founders, which a lot of people in America believe, or do we have to amend things given new circumstances? This is my concern in Subud, is Bapa gave us a lot of instructions. We're now what, 25 to 30 years from his death, and at some point we're going to be 50 years and 100 years and 200 years, but already so few years, the world is so imminently different than it was when Bapa was alive. I just give one example. Facebook didn't exist. Social networks did not exist when Bapa was alive. So how we learned things, how we communicated with each other, how people got together, how thought was formed was very different then. So my question is it appropriate for us to rethink things as the world has changed, or is it appropriate to say Bapa said it the way Bapa said it, and therefore that's the way we should remain?
You're talking about literally frivolous parts. Literally. What is the essence and purpose? It is the Latihan. What is the Latihan? And what is the purpose of the Latihan? This is what Bapa brought. And he brought the full range of it. And because of that, we have to respect that is the Latihan that he brought. This is how he brought it. And that the change, we change. The world changes, we change. We can go with that, but we do it from a place that is guided by our own connection with the power of the Almighty. So that's...
I really would like a quick rebuttal, because we're in the middle of a dialogue here. First of all, I don't think it's trivial at all. And I'm looking at this couch, which I'm going to vacate as soon as I answer this, because I see a lot of young people out there and a lot of old people in here, and I put myself among the old people. But I don't find it trivial if the young people aren't hearing about the Latihan and hearing about these important things, because we're not speaking their language. Bapa was from Indonesia. He spoke Indonesian. And then it got translated to other people in their language. I believe wholeheartedly the language has changed. And we are so far from speaking the language of the young people that I don't find this trivial at all. If Bapa gave a wonderful talk in Indonesian and you hand me the Indonesian, it might be spectacular. And I'm never going to understand it while I'm looking at this thing that has a language I don't understand. So I don't find this even remotely trivial. Are we including people in a way that they can understand?
Since it's a dialogue, what I meant by trivial is not, the whole point is the Latihan. This is a connection to the power of the Almighty. Now how you express something, how you speak about something, that becomes very personal. And that can change and shift, and that's perfectly fine. And what we're talking about here is if you change the words, of course you change the words. If you're speaking this, and I think you brought this up very, very eloquently. You speak to who you're speaking to. And it's the content of what you speak to and how you connect with someone. But the critical part here is you're not going to change the structure around what Bapa brought and how he expressed it. You can translate it, you can say this is the experience, but each person is going to have their own contact with the power of the Almighty and have their own talk, their own speech, which is then completely individual.
This is a really interesting discussion because I've been dealing with Bapa's words all my life. I think about a year after I joined Subud, I was told to do the tapes in Coombe Springs, so I was constantly copying Bapa's the talks he'd given a year before I came to Subud. And so I had to keep listening to them, because when you copied them in those days, you had to have 2 tape recorders and so on. So I've been doing it, listening to him all my life. And I just don't hear instructions. For me, Papa was receiving from a source that's infinitely higher than we are. There was a huge difference between when he spoke to, you know, to a group or gave a talk, to when he talked at home. You know, he was just an ordinary guy. The first time I was about to hear him speak, I was in Subud for about a year and a bit before I saw Papa. I first saw him when he came to the first Subud Congress in 1959. I was living in Coombe Springs at the time, and the day before he arrived, I had an extraordinary dream, which I've always remembered. It's so vivid. We were all lying on beds in the car park in Coombe Springs, and we were waiting for Papa to come to give us a talk. And there was a little platform in the middle of the car park where he was going to sit. There was a chair, and there were 2 chairs, and you know, Mr. Bennett was going to be next to him and so on. So I was wondering, why are we lying on beds? And then he came and sat in his chair, and Mr. Bennett came and sat next to him. And as he started speaking, you know, Saudara Saudara Sekalian, blah blah blah, this platform started lifting up into the sky on a kind of a column, like a hydraulic lift. And it went on and on and on and on and on, until it was about 2 miles up in the sky. So you could barely see Papa and Mr. Bennett giving this talk. And then I woke up. And I've always wondered what that means. And probably I'm going to find out one day. But so far, what I've always felt it meant was that he's going to say a lot of things that we will all not understand, because it's way above our heads. And also that he's not necessarily just speaking to us, but he's speaking to people centuries away, down the ages. And that his talks are not necessarily for us, but they will be understood much better when our great-great-great-grandchildren are alive. So I've always treated the talks like that. I've let them so wash over me. I've got an enormous amount out of them. Every time I hear the same talk, I hear completely different things, which is the nature of holy books, that they're always different, they're alive. It's completely different from linear stuff that, you know, we write, you know, handbook for doing this or handbook for fixing your TV. It's not like that. So when people talk to me about, oh yeah, somebody should do a synopsis of Papa's talks, it will never happen. You cannot do it. Because the moment you start to make a synopsis, it all starts moving around. And you will never find out. So when people talk about, oh, Papa's talks, they're all old-fashioned, they're Islam, they're Javanese stuff, you know, they're in a silly language, they haven't read them. I would suggest start reading them, because there's absolutely nothing of Javanese mysticism in. Okay, that's part 1. Part 2 is, from the moment Papa received the Latihan, people around him took it away and did something else. It started right away. The people, his companions, when he received the Latihan, several of them said, oh yeah, this is mine, and I'm going to go and do it my way. And they went off and started movements, and some, I know the names of some of them. I met people who do them, and they morphed into sects, into, you know, mystical sects with teachings, and they're sitting, you know, doing meditation and so on. Bappa did give a few instructions, but there's so few. Basically, he told us to surrender, to do the latihan for around half an hour or 3/4, or, you know, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, our latihan seems to stop around half an hour. I find that with 99.9% of the people who do it. He told us not to do it with men and women together. Was there anything else? That's about it.
Probation period?
Yeah, probation period, which I think, again, I didn't have a probation period.
There was a reason for it.
Yeah, but like Hallstein, we both were open about the same time. I didn't have a probation period. It didn't do me any harm. A lot of people don't, some do. However, I've noticed that when people are in a tremendous hurry to get open, they never stay more than a week or two. I've never known anyone who, you know, there are people who push like mad, and then, you know, they help us test, okay, you can be on. They never stay more than a week. So I assume that there is a good reason for the probation period. Now, all the rest of the stuff is just stuff we've made up. And that should change. I completely agree. So I'm halfway between these two things. On the one hand, yes, I think we have to change. There are a lot of things that are really stupid about the way we do Subud. And they should change, obviously, because, and I'm totally, you know, I'm so deeply touched by what you say, because each one of us, Bappa, the first thing when I started working for Bappa, the first thing he said to me, if you think that wall is white and I say it's blue, you've got to say it's white. Never say what I say. Always say what you experience. And that was also day one when I became his secretary. So this picture people have of Bappa is completely false. It's something that they've reproduced, they've projected onto Bappa from their childhood or from so popular images of authoritarian old men. Bappa was absolutely different. Bappa was unlike anybody I've ever met.
Subud means whole. Nothing is missing. Subud is a word which is complete. And it means that each human being has the potential of being Subud, or developing Subud within them. And the way to do that is not to repeat what Iburahayo Bappa says. The way to do that is to follow the inner guidance once you've started the latihan. Because it shows you, Bappa used to do tests with that. We all remember, the ones who had the chance to be there. He said, walk like a Mexican, or walk like this, and then walk as if you have a gun in your pocket, walk as if you have money in your pocket. We've all experienced that we can actually change inside, but we were all experiencing something different. It's because we were at the base programmed differently. And a snail will never try to copy a lizard because he follows his program. So to me, what is important is the Bappa's structure is magnificent. It's so simple and so beautiful. And to me, we must keep that structure there. We mustn't change it. But what we must do is to follow our own receiving, because it's the only way we can learn, and we can follow Bappa. We follow Bappa by following our receiving. We don't follow Bappa by following Bappa's steps. We follow our own receiving, and then we follow Bappa, because it both comes from the same source. Now, I know it's difficult. What I'm saying is very daring, because it is strong. You know, it's been written, and we've used that, and some Subud members I know have been thrown out. Indeed, myself, some of the French helpers were in great difficulties. And what do we do with Leo now? You know, how are we going to handle him? Oh, we should ask him to leave Subud, because what he's doing is not Subud. We should. It's terribly funny, because I'm following, I'm receiving, and you say it's not Subud. I mean, that's what the word means. Sure. So what we need to do is to be brave, and especially not to put a judgment on the brother or sister helper who still needs a walking stick, so they can use the helper's guide. But we must free ourselves to be completely free with God, so that we are actually a channel, and we know what's going on in the person who starts, and that's, to me, that's the only way. So our group where we are has started, and against Subud in a way. Some people will say it's not Subud. To me, it is Subud more than the others, because it's what Bapa was saying: follow your guidance.
I happened to be open so early that I didn't have to wait 3 months. And I'm very happy I didn't have to sit and listen to helpers for 3 months talk about the same thing over and over and over again. That gets very boring. I understand why people don't like that. On the other hand, I think it is the responsibility of the helpers is to make sure that people who are open know what it's about. They need to know that if you join Subud, things may happen to you. You may no longer want to do the work you used to do, or many things can happen to you. So there is a reason for people to wait, and really the helpers have to be responsible for whom they're opening and look after them. I think that's the main guideline rather than the 3 months.
I've always found, like, whenever people in Subud or helpers have tried to make me conform to some sort of dogmatism or rule set, I've always had to go the other way, and I found that very hard. And the language is a real issue as well, because for me personally, there's a lot of words in Subud that are commonly thrown around that somehow don't resonate with me personally. One such word, for example, is probationary period. I mean, to me that is such a horrible word. It means you are on trial here. You know, you are going to be judged and juried, and then based on our discretion as the spiritually enlightened, you may or may not pass. You know, a friend of mine, I've been learning Indonesian a lot. I've been living there for the last 5 years, and an Indonesian friend of mine is going through that process, but she's doing Indonesian, and she shared this word with me, penerangan, which is the process she was going through. And I said, what's that? Oh, it's the process of learning before I get opened. And that actually, as far as I understand it, translates literally into illumination, the period of illuminating, you know, the period of understanding. And this means, so now it's like, oh, that makes total sense to me. There's no authority in that. There's no enforcement in that. It's simply to understand what one is about to engage in. So I just wanted to share that with you all.
Yeah, that's actually Who knows? Well, I think that it's been changed a few times. Now it's called something else. Huh?
We're talking about applicants.
Yes. I think it's now called applicant. But I agree with you. Yeah, that would be a nice thing to call it. I mean, I don't know. So I would have. Yeah, sorry. I'm breaking the rules, you see. No, I mean, to me, what Leona has said is 100% Subud. I think this is what we are aspiring to. I mean, a helper should be able to feel what's the right thing to say, what's the right thing to do. And as he correctly said, the opening statement is a walking stick for those who can't figure that out yet, or who don't have the courage to receive. Similarly, I think the helper's guide also, but that's useful because a lot of helpers, we are kind of emergency helpers. You know, I'm not even, I've been a helper for, I don't know, 50 years or more, but I'm not sure I'm really a helper in Bapa's sense of the word. You know, I'm groping for, I'm still trying to put the latihan into my life, to live the latihan. I'm still working on it, and I'm probably, I don't know, 5% along the way. So I really don't know what is right and what is wrong. But I do know that I think both, if this is a war, as people have said, between two extremes, I think they're both wrong. I'm absolutely convinced, because I think the conservative people who want everything to be according to innumerable rules are hanging on to the wrong things. The things we have to hang on to are the fundamentals, and they mustn't change. But for the rest, we should be courageous. And Bappa changed everything all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. I mean, he never, he made a international helper. He made some kind of helpers. Then they became international helpers, and then he died. So it's all stopped. It was frozen. In that, I think we can keep changing the organization to make it work better.